Alright guys, what's up? It's Jack, and welcome back to another video. And today we are going to be having an in-depth discussion about XDefiant. And we're not just going to be talking about the game, we're going to be talking about specific requests that I have or that you may have, expectations, and even when it comes to content creation and streaming, we're going to be talking about that as well. And we're also going to be talking about the competitive side of things. So this is going to be like everything 100%, balled up and focused on XDefiant. And the game is coming up at some point, whether it's sooner in the year or whether it's later. It will be coming out at some point, and a lot of players are looking forward to it, both content creators and regular gamers alike, and even competitive players. And because of that, we're going to concentrate every single aspect of the discussion into this video. So let's get into it. So I want to start out with something that I haven't really talked about before, at least in depth, and that is content creation and XDefiant. Now, as we've seen, there's already been Call of Duty pros, or should I say former Call of Duty pros, that have already kind of been at like at one of the like when they revealed XDefiant not too long ago before the closed beta. They were shown playing against each other at the showcase or whatever you want to call it. So the interesting thing about this is that this could translate into the regular community as well. And what do I mean by this? Well, it can translate in a sense that, okay, when it comes to YouTube, okay, let's say you're making a video talking about Call of Duty, right? It only makes sense to have footage of Call of Duty in the background of that video when you're going to be commentating about Call of Duty, right? It only makes sense, right? Well, and at the same time, yes, it makes sense, and also the people that watch the content would prefer that as well. And there might be a slight chance to where XDefiant may or may not be the exception to that rule, because it is very familiar to Call of Duty, and it is what, I mean, no matter how you look at XDefiant, it is still described by many people as a Call of Duty alternative. Even though there are a good amount of things in the game that make it different, it's still described as a Call of Duty alternative because there are a lot of similarities, including the person that's making it, and well, not just the person, but the people that are making it. But at this point, it's like I've mentioned before, I don't even know if we could call it a Call of Duty alternative, to be honest with you, because it's Call of Duty doesn't play like this anymore. It's not, Call of Duty isn't so arcadey anymore, and this game very much is. So that's a big debate. Some people will believe that that's true, and some people will believe that it's not true, and some people just don't know what to say when it comes to that. So the thing is, when it comes to content creation, I believe that XDefiant may be a good replacement for channels that commentate on Call of Duty. Now, the reason I believe this is because, well, I'm kind of the perfect example, if you think about it, right? When you look at the size of my channel and the regular amount of views that I get and such, especially in comparison to like what I used to get back when I consistently posted Call of Duty commentaries that ran anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes on average for video, right? I have to say that ultimately, when I look at my recent views on XDefiant, it's like, okay, first of all, the views prove that people are interested in the subject, right? And second of all, people that watch Call of Duty may watch XDefiant, or did watch Call of Duty will watch XDefiant. There's a lot of people that are interested in this game that are in the Call of Duty community. And again, it doesn't just stop with the pros, it's also everything related to content creation. A lot of content creators have been, they've been playing, let's say for the ones that have PC, which pretty much all content creators have a PC. Some of us are more limited than others, for the first, I don't know, 6 years or so. Or actually, no, for the first 4 or 5 years or so, I didn't have a PC. I would just use an old laptop which was a miracle to capture footage because it shouldn't have, but it did, thank goodness. And that's how I did it. And streaming was pretty much a non-existent thing. I didn't even know how to do it properly. Even though I managed to do it a little bit, it always ended up crashing after. Sometimes it would crash sooner, or sometimes it would crash later. But I don't know how the hell I was able to do it. And there were other times where I actually was streaming from the PS4 or from the Xbox. So it is what it is. But ultimately, a lot of content creators nowadays have a PC, right? So there's that. But the interesting thing about this is that finally, after all this time, I think a lot of Call of Duty content creators that are doing this will they can either do one of two things. They can either completely switch over to XDefiant, or they can use XDefiant gameplay for whatever it is that they want to talk about. Because, well, first of all, people want to see XDefiant, and second of all, not only do people want to see XDefiant, but I think a lot of people will want to hear about XDefiant as well. They want to know about it. They want people talking about it, etc., etc. Now, the big question, right? The big elephant in the room is that going to last? Like, is XDefiant going to last? And the thing is, ultimately, XDefiant is going through what Call of Duty originally went through in the beginning. And what do I mean by that? Well, now, Call of Duty obviously ended up being a monster, especially after Modern Warfare 2. So, I mean, for it to last, of course, it was going to last, right? But XDefiant is a new kid on the block, and it is having an impact, but it's not having like the kind of impact that Call of Duty did. However, it is still having an impact. So there's still a lot that XDefiant itself has to prove, but in a lot of ways, it's already proven it. And the thing is, it's got the support system and transparency behind it by the community as well as the creators, which is a great thing, right? When you got the community and the devs working together in order to accomplish a common goal, it's a beautiful thing, right? I don't think anybody could deny that it's an absolutely wonderful thing. So therefore the potential, right? The potential is there. And with that being said, I want to get into the things that I want to that I specifically am requesting. In terms of pubs, I want all the maps to be playable for every game mode, right? As opposed to this number of maps playable for this game mode, this number of maps playable for that game mode. I think that should be a thing for ranked only, but I think for pubs, every map should be played for every game mode. And the reason for this is because when I played the different game modes, I think the only game mode that I didn't play was what's it called? The one game mode where it's like kill confirmed, because they put it on there and then they took it out. So I guess by the time I went back into the game, they removed it. So, which I'm sure I would have loved it anyway. However, I want to say that the maps that I did play that were different, I loved them. Like, I love those maps. They were the maps that I saw the pros play when I first saw the gameplay footage of what we all saw and what I posted on here. And I think they would still play very well in other game modes. And I think that on certain maps as well, and perhaps maybe all of them, I know that the focus is 6v6, but I think an 8v8 or a 9v9 or even a 10v10 would make a little bit more sense, because the maps are big. I mean, despite the fact that the game is obviously reasonably fast-paced, I think having a higher player count for, at least a playlist, right? At least a playlist for a higher player count, just to kind of use it as an experiment, because that's what they do with game modes nowadays in every first-person shooter, right? They put in a new game mode, and if people like it, or if it plays well, and if their data checks out and stuff like that, they'll play. I mean, they'll keep it in, right? So I think they should at least give that a shot, right? And here's another big request, and this one is kind of a hot take or a hot topic, but it's true. I want the aim assist to be left almost exactly as is. And what I mean by almost is that there are certain instances, like when you had verticality on somebody and you were in a position to where you were higher, right? Let's say you were up, let's say you were on a second floor and they were down the first floor, and you were aiming down your sights at them and trying to take them down. There would be no aim assist in that situation. So I don't know if that's deliberate, or I don't know if that was just a bug or a glitch or whatnot. But that needs to be fixed, so that way you can have aim assist on every, in every single scenario, of course. But in terms of the amount of aim assist, I don't think that needs to be touched. I know that there are a lot of controller players out there that will disagree with me, and I'm a controller player, and this is coming from a controller player. I want the aim assist to stay relatively where it is, because it widens the skill gap, number one, and it you can adjust, right? You can adjust, and your aim will get better, etc., etc. So um I think it needs to stay where it is. I don't think it needs to be increased to the point to where, to where it feels like so much of the work is being done for you, like the way it is with Call of Duty nowadays. So that's a big one. And for the community, it's a huge deal, because a lot of people have been mentioning that they've been getting so little to none. I mean, I can only speak from my experience. I mean, I do feel the fact that it's little, but it doesn't bother me. uh but at the same time, maybe depending on maybe the platform that people are playing on, or maybe other factors, maybe some people are actually getting even less aim assist than I got, or even none. So if that's the case, obviously everybody needs to be on an even playing field, and everybody needs to have, the same amount of aim assists. It needs to be working properly and consistently. But with that being said, I don't think it needs to be on the level of, what Call of Duty has been doing now with their levels of aim assist, right? In terms of like increasing it to the level that they've increased it to. And again, I don't have to be. I don't even have to be playing the new Call of Duty to feel it. And as a matter of fact, I mean, when I played, for instance, Black Ops Cold War, it's like the aim assist is strong in that game. There's no doubt about it. It's strong. And it's like, okay, no wonder a lot of PC players are complaining, right? So I mean, and again, I'm not saying this because PC players are complaining. Everybody's always going to complain, and it's always going to, like, aim assist is always going to be a hot topic, because I don't know if we're ever going to find, when it comes to crossplay, I don't know if we're ever going to find the right type of the right type of amount that will make both sides happy, right? But so far with this game, PC players seem to be happy, and console players, I mean, I can't speak for them, but for me, other than the inconsistencies of it, I'm fine with it. And the thing is, there's going to be input based matchmaking in this game. So in other words, if you're playing on controller, you are going to be playing against other controller players. Um, Granted, you decide to turn this on, right? Or enable it. And if you play on mouse and keyboard, you'll be playing on against other mouse and keyboard players. And just an FYI, just a reminder that the closed beta was a success. Especially when you consider the amount of people that played it. I mean, they were expecting 500,000 players at most, and they ended up getting over 1 million, which is great. More than twice as much, nearly, who knows, maybe even nearly 3 times as much as they expected, which is great, because again, everything is happening the way it should. People are talking about the game, people are making content about the game, the developers are being transparent, and these people it's working, right? And people are getting wind of it. And the thing is that the arcade first person shooter has kind of been out of commission for a while. And I know some people say, well, Jack, but COD, it's like, well, COD, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, Call of Duty just doesn't play like that unless you're in a bot lobby, right? If you're in a bot lobby, you can get away with running around and playing the arcade style and all that kind of shit, sure. But in terms of even the way it's kind of built, and the way the maps are and all that other stuff, and it's like, it's more tactical than ever. And arcade is not, it's an arcade first person shooter is quite different, which always drove me crazy with Black Ops 4, how they kept saying it was tactical or whatnot. It's like, well, I can understand tactics, but it's like it's still an arcade shooter, right? It's not a tactical one. But it's like they tried to mix the best of both worlds, and in some people's eyes they succeeded, in other people's eyes they didn't. So it just depends how you look at it personally. and what you consider to be tactical gameplay or a tactical shooter, right? So, um, like I personally think, like for instance, Rainbow Six Siege is like a tactical shooter, for instance, right? So just to name one that pops up in my head. Um, Now, there's something that I want to briefly discuss as well is that battle royale. Like a lot of people have been asking. I guess Mark Rubin has been asked over Twitter and stuff on whether or not XDefiant's gonna have a battle royale. Now, I think in some point in time in the future, I think it may, but it may not happen for like I don't know, maybe a year, give or take, because they need to focus. According to Mark Rubin, I'm paraphrasing. He said that they are focusing on their main game, on the main 6v6 game, which is correct because that's what XDefiant is, right? In terms of what they need to accomplish, and that is correct because you need to focus on what you're doing now, and then later on you can do the other stuff, right? Like, are they going to focus on DLC right now when they're focusing on the main game? No. I mean, I'm sure there's a few aspects that they've already kind of completed as far as DLC goes, but at this point right now, in terms of where they are and in terms of what they need to be doing and where their primary focus is, I'm pretty sure that the majority of the team, if not all the team, is focusing on what they're trying to do next with the game, right? And as they get closer to launch. So that is something that we cannot forget either, right? That's something that we cannot, they're not taking their eye off the ball, which is great. However, in the back of their mind, battle royale is still a thing because, first of all, yes, I mean, again, I'm not a battle royale guy, but I will say this, for the respect I have for the genre of battle royale as well as its players. I will say this is that XDefiant could make a hell of a battle royale, right? Um, and it's going to be quite interesting because with like let's say XDefiant does end up making a battle royale, right? Um, it would probably be around the same time when a Halo battle royale gets released, which is amazing, right? So it's like battle royale players are going to have like two new battle royale games that they're going to be playing that are going to be thrown into the mix. And then let's not forget about the games that some of these content creators are making, like Doctor Disrespect and Shroud and Nade Shot, right? They're making different games as well. I personally think Nade Shot is doing something kind of like an arcade shooter. I think Shroud said something he's doing some sort of PVE game or something like that, and then Doctor Disrespect is doing kind of his own battle royale type of game or something like that. So if that's even the way you describe it, but you get the point. So there are things to look forward to within the shooter genre, and as well as within the battle royale genre, right? So I think at some point we will get a battle royale with XDefiant, and as well as Halo, as well as a couple of new games coming out of the woodworks, and then other games are also going to be upgrading and updating their stuff, right? So, like when you look at what's that game called, Fortnite, for instance, right? They're going to upgrade their stuff, right? They're going to update their thing. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? So ultimately that's going to happen with Fortnite as well. So and sometimes you just never know what Fortnite's going to do in terms of their gameplay and stuff like that. Like the last thing that they did was they gave players the option to not have building in the game, right? So, and it's been permanently there since then because a lot of players enjoyed that and they enjoyed the game without building, because some people view building uh, as a positive when it comes to Fortnite, and other people view building as like not so positive because of the fact that it's they think it kind of just like they understand the you know they understand the reasons for it and stuff like that, um but yeah, at the same time, I guess there were too many people at one point that said, "Man, it would be amazing," or what this game would be playing like without building. And apparently, a lot of people really ate it up and absolutely enjoyed it, which again, I completely and totally understand. So when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, I get it. So I, for one, uh, do believe that at some point a battle royale will will be made for the game. So um, so that's great. I mean, obviously the question is when. I don't know. Maybe maybe a year after release, give or take. Maybe, optimistically speaking. But Again, I'm glad that the developers are sticking with the 6v6 first and foremost. Not just because it's what I prefer, but it's because, well, it's what they're setting out to do in the first place, right? And the same thing would go like if somebody was making a battle royale, and then somebody asked them, "Ooh, could you make a 6v6 version of your game because it looks so cool?" And if the devs were about to stop, putting all their focus on their battle royale before release, and putting attention to a 6v6 mode or something like that, with respawns and stuff like that, I think a lot of fans, as well as people in general that like that game, would kind of be disappointed. And I think at the end of the day, it would also kind of interfere with the success of their game, because or even maybe even delay things. That's another possibility as well. So you got to consider everything. So um uh and when one other thing I want to talk about with XDefiant is, obviously the maps for the most part are pretty solid. There's a few things to get used to, obviously. Do the maps have like a Call of Duty Ghosts feel vibe to them? I don't know. Sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no. And the reason I say yes is because of the size of the maps. I'm not saying that they're ridiculously large or anything like that, but they are large, right? In comparison to, let's say, back when Call of Duty was arcadey, right? Let's say pre Modern Warfare 2019, right? The maps were a little bit smaller, right? They were medium sized maps, and these maps are a little bit more towards the large side, but at the same time, it's still, the game manages to be very fast paced. And it's not, and it's also because, yes, they made the maps a little bit larger, but and it's also their layout and their design in terms of where you can go, what's safe, what's not safe, and stuff like that. So um safe spaces are pretty much minimized in the game. There's no place that's like so safe that you could stay there the entire time, at least from what I've seen so far and what I've played so far. uh Players can come at you from multiple sides, so it's like, it seems to encourage, like, okay, take a target out, then move. You know what I mean? Once you find a target, if you're in a good spot, take that target out and then move, and rinse and repeat, right? So, um, so in that aspect, looking at it that way, it's something that is actually correct, and it's actually something that is going to appeal to many people, because there are people that just play super fast. There are people that play, somewhere in the middle, and then there's people that play super slow. So it's like, which, like, this game gives, this map layout these map layouts give options to everything, right? So that's good to see. In terms of game modes, obviously this game needs to launch with a team deathmatch, right? Let's not beat around the bush here. Team deathmatch is a necessity for pretty much every first person shooter, and as a matter of fact, as far as I know, every first person shooter, or at least the vast majority of them, like even games like Overwatch, launch with team deathmatch. It's just in a different playlist. Like, it's not in the quick play. It's, you got to go into the arcade section, for instance, and then you select team deathmatch from there. It's an option, right? Even though it may not be the main event for some games, at least it's an option, right? Because team deathmatch is the most familiar and most known and most widely played game mode in pretty much every first person shooter since probably the beginning of first person shooters, right? And back in the day, that's all there was, actually, I think. At some point, I mean, I'm sure there were other modes here and there, but for the most part, team deathmatch was always the the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes, the must have for every, it was just the basics, really, for every single FPS. And that's something that still remains true to this day, which is kind of cool when you think about it, really. It's still something that's true to this day. And it's also fascinating because it's probably the most basic game mode that you can have. You don't have any objectives other than just to take out the other targets and get to a certain, get to the score cap before they do. So my other request is, I know that this is a team based shooter. I know that teamwork is very much a highlight of this game. However, um there's also solo players, and even though they may not mind playing team deathmatch and stuff like that, there are people out there that love free for all and prefer to play free for all, right? So we need to have, in my opinion, a free for all mode in this, preferably at launch. But it's nice if they like if they don't have it at launch, at least hopefully they can add it afterwards, because I think free for all would actually work pretty well in this game, considering the abilities and considering how the game works and stuff like that. An 8-man free for all or a 10-man free for all would be great in this game, or a 9-man or something like that. But I think 6 would be a little too slow paced. So I think at the very least an 8, and at the very most a 10 would be ideal for this game. And when you look at the map size, when you look at the map sizes and everything else, because when you look at for instance, when you look at a game mode like your regular 6v6, that's a total of 12 people that are on the map. So technically speaking, that means you could theoretically have a 12-man free for all, because the map is big enough to fit those people. But obviously the difference being that these people are not on teams, so that kind of plays a factor as well. So you have to dial it down a little bit. So that's why a 10, a 9, or an 8 people free for all would make sense, because there are no teams. So you'd be getting into engagements quite quicker, because when it's a 6v6, you're not attacking people that are on your team because they're on your team, right? So you got to find the other guys that are on the opposite side of the map first, and then obviously they end up spreading around and such and such. So yeah, one of my biggest requests is a free for all. Now I've talked about this in a previous video, and I'm going to talk about it again. Another big request that I have is that this is a wish actually, other than just a request. I wish the pros and cons system for the weapon attachments wasn't a thing. I think that was something they could have done without, in terms of what current Call of Duty is doing and how they're doing it with their game and this game. Now, obviously, it doesn't necessarily punish the rusher as much as, like, let's say a Modern Warfare 2019 or a Modern Warfare 2022 does, for instance. But it's a system that's good on paper, but not as good in execution. And I think it just overly complicates things in terms of the combinations that a player might use. And even when they do find the combination that's right for them, it's like they're not going to change it. So the thing is, what I'm trying to say is that back in the day, before the pros and cons system for the weapons attachments, players would actually have multiple, especially if all the attachments were good, players would actually have multiple different kinds of classes with attachments for a single weapon at times, right? Depending on the situation, or depending on what they wanted to do in terms of challenges and stuff like that. So if the weapons just have pros, like, obviously beforehand weapons always had pros, it's like they made your attachments better, right? So you got a grip on your weapon, it would reduce recoil, right? If you had a stock on your weapon, it would increase your strafe speed, blah blah blah. So it's like okay, well, just if you get rid of the cons, or if you just make it to where it's back to simplicity, I think a lot of players would actually not only have an easier time creating the class and understanding what the weapon does to your gun, etc., but it would also have players choose more variety classes and simple. And this is it makes it simpler for not just your hardcore fan base, but also your casual fan base. And let's face it, everybody, all the developers care about their casual fan base, because they are like the biggest chunk of players, right? So in terms of percentage, so it's like, if you have something in the game that's less complicated, or should I say not complicated at all, then it's a win-win. So and people are going to resort less to having to look up videos in terms of what class works, or to having to be explained what works or whatnot. I mean, granted, the majority of people I don't even think they even go on YouTube to look for classes and stuff like that. And if they do, they're kind of going into a transition to where they're going from like a super casual to somebody who who cares and stuff like that. Now I know you want everybody to be that, right? Obviously the influence is for everybody to be that. But with that being said, there's just more to it than that. There's there's always going to be the majority of players being casual, and that's something that we need to bear in mind. So this is something that works for the hardcore community and the casual community, and it's something that never, I mean, in the first place, Call of Duty players never complained about attachments. Really, the only time they complained about attachments is when attachments were missing for certain classes. Like in Black Ops 4, they iterated balance with their weapons by like just not allowing certain attachments for weapons and allowing other attachments for others. So what they ended up doing was they ended up limiting weapons, right? There are certain weapons that I didn't use in that game that I would have loved to use, but there were certain attachments I couldn't use, so therefore I didn't use that weapon because it didn't match my playstyle, and it forced me to use the weapon a certain way as opposed to using the weapon the way I want to use it. So, we all like customizing our weapons. So it's like, well, if you can customize them to fit your playstyle, isn't that something that's better? Isn't that something that's more fun? Isn't it something that's more experimental? Um, Now, granted, you still could do that with the pros and cons system and that XDefiant offers, but it's a lot more complicated. And the fact that you have to kind of take into bear in mind that the certain attachments are going to make your weapon worse is something that kind of, in my humble opinion, is just annoying. Attachments should not be having negative impact on your weapons. I think, when it comes to an arcade first person shooter, realism again needs to be minimized or not in the game at all. So I think that needs to go. But I seriously doubt that that's going to happen. They've put in the pros and cons system for a reason, and I think a lot of that was also inspired by the competitive community, possibly. Again, I could be wrong. It could be strictly a dev thing. It could be the devs that decided to do that because they saw the value in it or whatnot, or they have a different viewpoint on it. So it could be that. But for me, I think it was just, I don't know. It could have been the pro thing, but which is kind of surprising though, because if because it kind of makes me lead to believe that it kind of isn't, because when you look at it, I go back and forth on it, because when you look at Infinity Ward games, they're the ones that are like the least competitive friendly, and when you look at Treyarch games, they're the ones that are really focused on competitive. So Modern Warfare 2019 was the first game to implement the pros and cons system, right? So think about that for a second. So it's like, I don't know. So I'm really curious as to how it turns out, or if there are going to be any changes or whatnot. And I think some players may even request a kind of a bare bones mode or something like that. They're going to call it completely different, probably. But with no hero abilities and stuff like that, I think would be very interesting for this game. I know that the game was designed around them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there may not be that the game. It doesn't necessarily mean that the game won't play well without the heroes. I think if the foundation is there, which I believe it is, if the foundation is there, and if the game at its foundation is good enough, I think that the game can and play very well without the heroes. If you need your heroes in order for the game to become successful or playable and stuff like that, I think that's a flaw. I think that's a weakness of the game, in my opinion. It's kind of like what Tony Stark told Spider-Man. It's like, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. See what I mean? So so if this game is nothing without its, with the heroes and the abilities or whatnot, or the specialists or whatever they're called, factions, then it's like, maybe the game needs to take a deeper look at itself and change a few things to make its foundation better. But I don't think that's the case. I think that the game is still good without them. Just thinking about the game without the heroes and stuff like that, I think the game is just fine. And who knows, they may even make playlists out of it. I think they will. The only thing that sucks is that if certain players like a certain playlist that they put in there, I mean, it just doesn't seem like it stays. It kind of gets rotated and is not part of the permanent playlist. I think the only time that happens is when the vast majority of players not only play that playlist, but like, give the devs good feedback and stuff like that. Because again, you have a limited amount of people that are playing your game, so you can't have like an insane amount of game modes, or else it's going to be spread to where people are not going to be able to find matches, and if they do find matches, the connection and experience is going to be terrible. um but if you had like if you had a billion players playing your game, then obviously that would never be a problem, because there would always be enough players on any given playlist for the connection to be smooth and consistent and to find matches fast enough, blah blah blah. But that's not the reality we live in here. I think Black Ops 1 back during its heyday had like a maximum of like 1 or 2 million players or something like that, which is incredible when you think about it. So, oh, excuse me. So with XDefiant, I love the immense potential that the game has. The game absolutely has immense potential. And I, for one, am very optimistic in terms of what a game like this could achieve. And launch is going to be, ranked is going to be at launch, which is good, because in Call of Duty, for instance, there hasn't really been ranked at launch for a long time. For Halo, there was, which was a good thing. But at the same time, they didn't have team deathmatch at launch, which hurt them in the long run, obviously. And I think the crew here at XDefiant is very well aware that team deathmatch needs to be on launch. I think that's pretty much the one thing that we can guarantee, is that team deathmatch is going to be on launch. We already know that ranked is going to be on launch, and thanks to a recent update by Mark Rubin that I've recently made a video on, they announced that 120 frames could make launch. They thought it wouldn't, but it seems like it could. Again, it's not a guarantee, but the chances of it being at launch have gone up significantly. So I think that's great. And the biggest thing that I'm curious about in this game is actually one of the more basic things. I mean, obviously, in concept it's basic, but in execution it's quite harder, especially if you're a developer, because you know how this stuff works and you know what it takes to make it happen. But I'm curious as to what this game is going to feel like with the servers that we're supposed to get. We were actually supposed to get those kind of servers with the closed beta, but we didn't, because they found a bug at the last minute. So they had to resort to the previous server iteration or whatever, which is why we got the problems that we got in terms of things like the desync and the wall running, the wall banging or whatever it's called, and the inconsistencies. So when this game is optimized, or it's optimized servers and stuff like my thing at this point is like, what does the game feel like? Because like, we know what the game feels like in terms of gameplay and all that kind of stuff, but it's like, when it comes to the hit detection, and when the hit detection is solid and everything, that's basically what completes the game in terms of how good it feels and stuff like that, right? So it's like, I'm wondering, what does XDefiant actually feel like when the servers and the hit detection stuff like that are optimized, and when the wall banging is at the minimum and stuff like that, and when there's a lot more consistencies in the game, right? That is one of the big questions that I have, is like, what does this game actually feel like? Because the developer, Mark Rubin, was in charge of Call of Duty Ghosts. And if you guys remember Call of Duty Ghosts, and I've mentioned this in the previous video about this game as well, is that the hit detection in Call of Duty Ghosts is some of the best in Call of Duty history. Call of Duty Ghosts, it was a very mixed Call of Duty, in terms of how it was received. It was very mixed among the community. But one thing you cannot deny is that Call of Duty Ghosts had excellent hit detection. So I'm assuming Mark Rubin, and possibly those that came with him, that used to work with him at Infinity Ward, I'm assuming those guys know what it takes to make a game with good hit detection, right? Specifically, if that specific part of the group went with him, right? The ones that are in charge of that specific part of the game, in terms of the connection and server optimization and all that kind of stuff, right? So so that's something that we can't forget. We can, I think it's safe to assume and to at least expect when everything is optimized for there to be good hit detection, right? At least that's what I'm expecting. And at the same time, I because I know what Mark Rubin is capable of, because of what we've gotten previously with Call of Duty, specifically Ghosts. And again, even though Call of Duty Ghosts was a mixed game, when you look at it from what Call of Duty Ghosts actually did in comparison, and probably the things that Mark Rubin has learned since that time, it's very, very safe to assume that uh, that the game is going to feel good and it's going to feel smooth and it's going to play very well. And that's the thing that's going to make the game even more addictive, right? Is how a game feels. And that's what kept people like, despite the fact that the beta was a success, right? And that it was a closed beta. The game obviously wasn't feeling as good as it could possibly feel. And that's fine because it was a true beta. And on top of that, they had to resort to using their old servers, their old pre-alpha server build or whatever you want to call it, which caused the game to, have the issues and that aspect that it did. But despite all that, it was still a success, and people were still talking about the amount of potential and how they're excited about the game and all that kind of stuff. And, the fact that there's no skill-based matchmaking in pubs. And of course, that ranked is going to be on launch, which is also going to help as well. So, the people that want to be super uber ultra competitive, guess what? They can go straight into ranked and play against people of their skill level and work their way up the ranks that way and all that stuff, right? And I think there's also going to be a progression system, like a legit progression system similar to a Prestige, because my goodness, I could make an entire video, and which I probably will, talking about the importance of a Prestige system. As a matter of fact, even Halo Infinite is adding it in. So, and as a matter of fact, even back in the old days of Halo, when Bungie made their final Halo game, Halo Reach, they added in a progression system that was similar to Prestige. And as a matter of fact, it was like the biggest progression. Like, there's very few people on the planet that made it to maximum level in Halo Reach, which was called Inheritor. And I am fortunate enough to know one person in my real life. He's one of my two best friends that made it to Inheritor. And I played a lot of Halo Reach, and I didn't even come close to Inheritor. But he made it to Inheritor. I was like, oh my gosh, And you have to understand, and that it appeals, and this was back, in 2009, 2010? I very much, when it came to multiplayer, very much, a casual player, and I didn't know what I was doing in comparison still, but I just loved playing the game, right? But the leveling up was a factor in me coming back to playing the game and being addicted to the game even more. It reinforces everything else that you do in the game. Like, for instance, okay, like this game, XDefiant here, right? A game that has potential to feel very good with the optimized servers and getting the aim assist right, and the hit detection, connection, and all that kind of stuff. The gameplay itself, the challenges, the weapon upgrades, the create a class, the factions. You put all these things together, man. These things are incredible, right? But when you got the good hit detection and good connection and stuff like that to go along with that, it amplifies your experience absolutely. Like, any person, especially if you're experienced and you know and understand what I'm talking about here, when a game has that progression system and that good feel to it, right? Like, all of these things support your game to become more successful. Like, the prestige system or the progression system, let's say, right, along with the good hit detection, actually do correlate, because they're there to create the same feeling effect for the player, to create a similar result. And that is not just to keep the player playing, but to get them addicted, right? Because it's supposed to feel good. Something feels good, gives you that hint of dopamine. It's like, okay, they're doing it right. Okay. But they're both there for the same reason, but they cover two different departments. But in terms of the results are the same, right? It's like the game feels good. Like, you're getting a hint of dopamine because the hit detection, the game feels good, right? And the gameplay is great, and the guns feel great, and the attachments and the factions and all that, right? You're getting different hints of dopamine because of those things that are going on, the combination of those things, right? And whenever they do happen in the game, right? And then when you have a progression system, this is again why challenges were put in games in the first place. Like RPG elements that were put into, like, let's say Call of Duty way back in the day, and with the XP system and stuff like that, that is part of the formula that kept Call of Duty, that made Call of Duty what it was, and what kept players coming back time and time again, and what made Call of Duty so addictive that it was. The gameplay alone, especially now in the year 2023, is as good as it is. It's not enough because players have been expecting more thanks to the fact that other games have been doing this as well, and it's just standard now. Gamers expect more, and rightfully so. But ultimately, obviously, the biggest thing is how the game feels. But when you've got that progression system of a prestige or something of that nature, it's incredible. One of the things that makes Destiny so amazing, right, is the how the leveling up system. People want to reach that high level of light or whatever it is, right, and constantly find loot that's going to make them level up even more and make them more powerful, et cetera, right? So that is part of what keeps people coming back to Destiny. It's the grind itself, which is a normal part of Destiny, but then it's also the fact that, hey, you're also doing this, and you're also doing this, and you're also doing that. So it's like, essentially you are doing the same thing over and over again, but it's giving you a reason, and it's making it like appealing to do that over and over again, right? So I can even go even further in depth and talk about how some people, both men and women, are not ideal for exclusive relationships, because one of the things that keeps them coming back and gives them that into dopamine and that kind of pleasure is the fact that they don't want to have an exclusive relationship because they like multiple partners, right? Because they get bored, or they like variety or whatnot. And guess what? So do gamers, right? And I legitimately mean that. Like, seriously, like, some people do not want, or a percentage of people, I don't want to say some or a lot, but a percentage of people don't want exclusive relationships, because after a while it just becomes stale with the same person. So what they want, multiple people, or they want to quote unquote play the field. And both men and women do this. So it's not just something that's exclusive to one sex. But the thing is, like, options, right? Ultimately, what is at the base of that? It's options. So when you give the player options, or when you just give them different ways to progress, right? You're progressing with unlocking things, you're progressing with XP, with challenges and stuff like that. You name it, right? With skill and customization and stuff like that. Oh, and what else are we progressing? And we're progressing with the leveling up system, right? So it's like, it's really, it gives you a hint of dopamine when you get like that kill, and all of a sudden get that pop up on the screen that says you've either accomplished a challenge, or you've gotten to another weapon level with your weapon, or you've gotten to another level with in your progression system, right? That's why, like in Modern Warfare 3, for instance, when they did the I don't know if it's the weapon proficiencies, or, oh, no, excuse me, well, how they introduced, like, you can level up your weapon, right? There's a reason why they did that. Because they saw that people loved leveling up, right? And it was addictive, and it made you feel good and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to add in one more layer of leveling up, and we're going to attach it to your weapon, which makes absolute sense, right? So, and guess what? Ever since then, it's kind of been a staple, right? So it's like, you can't not go without it, right? There's certain things you need to have in your first-person shooter today. There are certain, as well as game modes and what you should expect from a first-person shooter, as well as other things. So, because when you look at like that last gunfight right there, where I could have taken out that last guy, I was pretty much on target, but it just seemed like my bullets didn't connect, or there was like too much of a delay or whatever it was. So, and the fact that I was probably a little bit low on health compared to the other player. If the servers were optimized and working the way they should have, I might have won the second gunfight as well. There was certainly a possibility of that happening, right? Or it could have been a closer gunfight, you know what I mean? So these things, whether you're a casual player or whether you're a hardcore player, as I like to call it, these things absolutely matter when it comes to a game like XDefiant or any other first-person shooter that you want to play. Because, the foundation is that the game should feel good, right? And then after that, build everything else around that. So, and I think before I leave for work today, which is going to be soon, very soon actually, I might even tweet at Mark Rubin either during work or right before I leave to get in the car. And I'm gonna say, hey, could you say anything else, or could you at least tell us like if there's gonna be some reveal about the progression system? Because we know there's gonna be a progression system, and then we know that there's gonna be a it's gonna probably be similar to Prestige or whatnot. And if I know Mark Rubin, and if I know that he knows what he knows and what he's learned over the years as well, is that I think there's going to be something in here that's going to be very, very lengthy in terms of to grind in order to get to max. Um, this is why they did up to level 1000 in Call of Duty. But for some reason, even though it was good that they did that, it feels like there was something missing in terms of the grind to level 1000. Because once you get to 100, it's like you get back to number one again, and you basically repeat it 10 times, right? Um, it almost feels like there's something missing. I'm not sure, and I think that's what Halo is getting right too, because like you can just look up like on the 20th they're going to release a new progression system. They released an article about it, but there's many different grades and emblems and stuff like that within every level of progression that's going to be there, and many tiers. So I think that's like a good way to go about it, as opposed to just a number, right? As opposed to just a number that keeps increasing, and then once you get to like the next 100 you get another emblem or whatever it is. They have like a progression system within the progression system, so you can see just how far along you are, and others can see how far along you are, and you're never too crazy far away from that next level, which is something that also keeps players coming back, especially if you're a casual, because casuals are not going to play as often as somebody as like a hardcore player, right? So I think that you need to. I think the fact that like every level of progression not being too far out of reach, I think would be a good move. Um, Obviously, the higher up you get, the further along they need to be. But at the same time, like from a tier to tier basis, I think it needs to be reasonable. So that way, because if there's not much change between 1 and 100, or if it takes forever to get from 99 to 100, it kind of becomes stale after a while. It's like the beginning. It's like the first 20 to 25 levels. Um, are like it feels really good because you can feel the progression, getting the hint of dopamine, and then once you get like to like let's say 30, it's like you start to feel that less and less. I think there needs to be a little bit more of consistency in terms of like the good feel of leveling up, so to speak, and that's the length of going from level to level. But again, if there's a shit ton of levels, then it's like you can make it to where it just lasts and lasts. But overall, when it comes to XDefiant, these are my thoughts about the game. And this was I wanted this discussion to go a little bit longer, but ultimately I got to go to work, and I started recording a little too late. But ultimately that's okay. But for the most part, I think I've gotten everything that I wanted to get out of this game. Obviously, factions are going to need a balance. Obviously, they're going to need a rebalance and stuff like that. And some players out there might even request like a hardcore game mode. I don't know if that's going to be a thing, because in Call of Duty, even though there is hardcore, it's a very small percentage of the community, and there's not many game modes in hardcore in Call of Duty because of the amount of players that play. So they can't have every single game mode in hardcore, and that's why that is. So with XDefiant, is that even going to be a thing? Is it even would it even work very well? I mean, I guess it could, but I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll see. Is it something that they could even do? Maybe they'll just do something to where they reduce the health. Maybe, I don't know, but we'll see. There's all sorts of different things that they could play with. That's the beautiful thing. They can come with all sorts of different playlists, and they can try and see what the public likes. And if the public really likes a certain type of thing, knowing Mark Rubin, his transparency and his understanding, and the fact that he's a gamer himself and understands, I would say that they would keep it in. I don't think they're going to rotate it like Call of Duty does. It's like so many people will like this playlist, but they're going to rotate it out anyway. So it's like I think even Halo does that to a certain extent. So but in terms of Halo, I think Halo's in a better place now, and especially since the people that were in charge of 343 have now been gone. And the people that were in charge of the Master Chief Collection are in charge of Halo Infinite now. I think that potentially can give us some good stuff. So but anyway, let me know down in the comment section what you guys think of XDefiant. What are your specific recommendations and requests for the developers? Do you agree with some of what I said? Do you disagree? What do you love most about arcade shooters? What is it about XDefiant that has you hopeful? What is it that what do you think about content creators as well as the pro players? Do you think some pro players are going to come out of retirement to play this game professionally because this is the type of game that they played previously. Some pros, I'm sure, even retired because they don't like this flavor of Call of Duty that they're getting anymore. So, and the fact that it's a different game. And do you think current pro players that are playing COD might make a switch to XDefiant? The ones that are younger and the ones that are in their prime and stuff like that. What do you think? Do you think that XDefiant is a threat to the Call of Duty competitive scene? That is a beautiful thing. So let me know what your opinions are. Thank you very much for watching and or listening. I really appreciate it. And for the support that you guys have been giving me lately has been tremendous. Thank you. And I'll catch you guys in the next discussion.